At my son's wedding in front of hundreds of guests, he pointed at me with cold eyes and told me to leave. His reason? I refused to give him my house. The house where I raised him. The house his late father and I built with our bare hands. And in that moment, with music still playing and the bride's family staring in shock, I realized my own flesh and blood had chosen greed over love. I'm Anna, a 58-year-old widow from small-town America. I spent my whole life working double shifts, saving every dime just so my son Daniel could have a better future. His father and I bought a modest home on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 stories with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was filled with love. After my husband passed, that house became my anchor, my last connection to him. When Daniel got engaged to Lily, I thought it was the happiest day of his life. He was finally starting his own family, and I hoped to pass on our values of honesty, love, and sacrifice. But the moment wedding planning began, I noticed a change. Daniel grew distant. Lily, beautiful and charming on the surface, always whispered in his ear, always eyeing my property like it was hers already. It started with casual suggestions. Maybe you should downsize, Mom. You don't need such a big place all by yourself. I brushed it off. But then the hints grew sharper. One evening, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, his face hard. Mom, Lily and I need a house. It doesn't make sense for you to keep living here alone. Just sign it over to us. You can move into a small apartment. My chest tightened. That house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was memories. Of my husband building the porch, of Daniel taking his first steps across the living room, of Christmas mornings by the old fireplace. Giving it up felt like erasing my life. I told him no. Calmly, firmly, this house is not yours to take. He stormed out that night. And from then on, the warmth between us began to vanish. The wedding day arrived, a grand affair in a rented hall decorated with lilies and candles. Guests filled the space, laughter and music echoing through the air. I wore a simple navy dress, clutching my late husband's watch for courage. For a moment I thought everything might go smoothly. But as the ceremony ended and the celebration began, Daniel approached me with Lily at his side. "Did you bring the papers?" he whispered harshly. I froze. He meant the deed to the house. Even on his wedding day, that's all he cared about. I shook my head. "No, Daniel. This is not the time." His face twisted with rage. And then, in front of his bride, her parents and all our guests, he raised his voice. "Then leave. You're not welcome here." The music faltered, conversations hushed. Every eye turned to me. My son's words cut deeper than any knife. Humiliation washed over me as I clutched my purse, my hands trembling. And just like that, I was forced to walk out of my own son's wedding. Hi everyone, drop a comment and tell me where you're from. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Enjoy listening, but what Daniel didn't know was that my refusal to hand over the house wasn't just stubbornness. I had a secret. One that would turn his world upside down and show him exactly why that house could never, ever belong to him. I stood outside the banquet hall, clutching my purse like it was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. The night air was heavy and I could still hear the music thumping inside, laughter and clinking glasses echoing like cruel reminders of the celebration I wasn't welcome in. My own son's wedding, and I was standing on the curb, humiliated as if I were some uninvited strangers. I thought about leaving right then, catching a cab and disappearing back into my quiet little house. But I couldn't bring myself to move. My chest ached with too many questions. How did we get here? When had the boy I raised with so much love turned into this cold man who could throw me out in front of everyone? Inside, I knew Robert's new wife, Emily, was playing her part in this. She'd been whispering in his ear for months, dropping little comments about how they needed more space, how the house I lived in was too perfect for a young family. I'd brushed it off at first, thinking Robert wouldn't betray me like that. But tonight his cruel words had made it clear. He wanted me out, even if it meant throwing me away like yesterday's garbage. I finally forced myself to walk toward the parking lot, but before I could get far I heard a voice behind me. "Mrs. Clark." I turned and saw Emily's mother, Patricia, standing near the entrance. Her face was a mix of pity and something sharper, something I couldn't quite read. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I told Emily this would happen. Your son, he's in over his head. You might want to be careful." "Careful?" I asked. My throat was tight. "What do you mean by that?" Patricia glanced back at the glowing hall before speaking again. Emily and Robert. They've made promises to people they shouldn't have. That house of yours, it's not just about wanting space. They're desperate. And desperate people do cruel things. A chill swept through me. What kind of promises? I pressed, but she only shook her head. You'll see soon enough, she said before slipping back inside, leaving me standing there with my heart racing. I didn't know what to make of it. Promises? Desperation? The words looped in my head as I finally drove home, the silence of the car pressing on me harder than any noise ever could. When I pulled up to my house, I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the place I'd built with my late husband. Every memory was inside those walls. Robert's first steps, the birthdays, the Christmas mornings filled with laughter. How could he see it as nothing more than a piece of property? I finally went inside, dropped my shoes by the door and sank into my chair. I told myself I'd deal with it tomorrow, that maybe Robert would come to his senses. But as I looked out the window, I noticed headlights slowing in front of my house. Then another car pulling up right behind it. 2 cars. Strangers stepping out. And that's when I realized, this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. I froze by the window, barely breathing as the 2 cars idled outside. Their engines rumbled low, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls of my home. I pulled the curtain back only a sliver, just enough to see figures step out. 2 men in dark coats and another in a suit that gleamed faintly under the streetlight. They weren't neighbors. They weren't friends. And the way they stood, scanning the street like hunters surveying their ground, made my stomach twist. For a moment I thought about switching off the lamp beside me, pretending no one was home. But something told me they already knew I was here. One of them glanced directly at my window, and though I'd barely moved the curtain, I was sure he saw me. The man in the suit gestured toward my house. My heart thudded hard enough so I had to press a hand to my chest. Why here? Why no? I scrambled up from the chair and reached for my phone, but before I could dial anyone there was a knock at the door. Firm. Deliberate. Not frantic, not polite, just a knock that demanded. I stayed rooted to the spot, clutching the phone like it might shield me. Seconds passed. Another knock, heavier this time. Mrs. Clark. A voice called out, deep and calm, like it belonged to someone used to getting what he wanted. We'd like a word. My blood ran cold. They knew my name. I didn't answer. Instead, I went back toward the kitchen, debating whether to slip out the back door and run to the neighbors. But then the voice spoke again. It's about Robert. That stopped me. My breath caught in my throat. Robert? What could these men possibly want with him? The third knock rattled the frame. I almost dropped the phone. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay silent, I forced myself to ask, "Who are you?" There was a pause, then the suited man replied, "Let's just say your son owes more than he can pay. We're here to discuss alternatives." Alternatives. The word echoed like a warning bell. Patricia's words from earlier, "They've made promises to people they shouldn't have," suddenly clawed their way back into my mind. I thought of Robert, of Emily, of their desperation to push me out of the house. And now it clicked. My home wasn't just about space for them. It was collateral. I felt the weight of the walls around me shift, as though the very house had turned into a bargaining chip I never agreed to put on the table. Another voice, rougher, shouted through the door, "You either let us in now or we'll take what's ours another way." The doorknob rattled. My pulse raced. Should I call the police? Should I open the door and try to reason? Or should I run while I still had the chance? Before I could decide, a sharp crack split the night. The sound of glass shattering from the back of the house. They weren't waiting for my answer anymore. The crash of glass sent me stumbling backward, the phone slipping from my trembling hands onto the tiled floor. The sound of footsteps followed, measured, purposeful, boots crunching over the shards in the back room. I darted toward the hallway, heart hammering in my chest. My mind screamed run, but the thud of another pair of boots at the front door trapped me in the middle, between 2 entrances, like prey cornered in its own den. "Stay calm, Mrs. Clark," the deep voice called again, only this time from inside the house. "We're not here to hurt you. Unless you make us." My throat tightened. I pressed my back against the wall, every muscle shaking, forcing myself to think. These weren't burglars looking for valuables, they were after something bigger. Then I remembered his words. Robert owes more than he can pay. Robert's debts. The late-night phone calls. Emily's sudden hostility about selling the house. The puzzle pieces slammed into place. I didn't have long to process before the suited man appeared at the end of the corridor. His presence filled the space. Not loud, not frenzied, but steady, like someone who already owned the outcome of this night. "Your son," he said evenly, "made promises. Big ones. To the wrong people. And when he couldn't deliver, he offered this." His gaze swept around the house, cold and appraising. "Your home, your stability, your safety, all on the table without your consent." "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "He wouldn't." But even as I said it, I knew it was true. The suited man took a step closer. "Kevin's not the only one tangled in this. Your daughter-in-law knows." She agreed. "She's been very persuasive in making sure he kept us happy. But time's up. Emily." Her sudden warmth toward me weeks ago, the rehearsed apologies, the convenient pressure to sign away the deed, it wasn't kind. It was desperation disguised as love. "You can end this tonight," he continued. "Sell the house. Hand over the proceeds. And this little arrangement vanishes." His words were smooth, almost courteous, but behind them was a weight that promised ruin if I refused. My knees weakened, but rage flared in my chest. They had used me, lied to me, and now strangers were walking through the wreckage of my home like it belonged to them. "I won't give you a single thing," I said, my voice breaking yet louder than I expected. The suited man's smile was small, chilling. "Then you leave us no choice." A shadow moved behind him. Another man emerged from the broken back room, holding something in his hand. A thin folder, edges torn, papers spilling slightly. He dropped it onto the floor in front of me. I bent down, hesitating before flipping it open. Inside were copies of contracts. Loan agreements. My son's signature sprawled across every page. And at the very bottom, scribbled in hasty pen, Emily's name was a witness. The truth slammed into me harder than the broken door ever could. But before I could react, the man in the suit leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You have until tomorrow night. Refuse us again and it won't just be the house we take." And then from the shattered back window came another voice, urgent, panicked. "Mom." Robert had returned. The silence after Richard's arrest felt almost unnatural. 4 months, chaos had been the only rhythm in my life, a constant drumbeat of betrayal, fear, and heartbreak. Now, as I sat in my small living room with Abigail by my side, the air felt still, like the storm had finally passed. The trial came quickly. Kevin, in a desperate attempt to save himself, tried to pin everything on Richard. But the evidence was overwhelming. The judge's gavel came down with a finality that echoed in my bones. Richard would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Kevin, my own son, wasn't spared either. His financial frauds, debts, and ties to organized crime caught up with him. Abigail would squeeze my hand every time she saw the tears he would spend away, whispering, "I sat this isn't every hearing, my heart breaking in ways. He made his choice I hadn't thought possible. The house, my home was saved." I kept asking myself, with Richard gone, where did I go Kevin wrong? Out of the picture, there was no one left I once cradled in my arms, but walking into someone's quiet halls, betraying his I realized it would never feel the same again. Memories were etched into every wall. Birthdays, holidays, even the sound of Kevin's laughter when he was little. Those memories had been tainted now, overshadowed by the pain of what he'd done. One evening Abigail sat me down. "Mom," she said softly, "why don't you sell this place? Not because Kevin wanted you to, but because you deserve a new start? Somewhere that's yours, free of all this hurt." At first the thought pierced me like a blade. Selling my house. My home. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. This house had become a graveyard of broken trust. I didn't need these walls to remember the good. The real memories lived inside me. So I sold it. Not in desperation, not under anyone's thumb, but by my own choice. And with the money, Abigail and I bought a smaller, cozier place near the edge of town. It had a garden where she planted roses, and every morning I'd sit with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise without that familiar weight pressing on my chest. Sometimes late at night I'd think about Kevin. About how different things could have been if he'd chosen honesty, family, and love over greed. I prayed for him, not for his freedom but for his heart to heal if it ever could. Life didn't go back to how it was before. It couldn't. But in the quiet moments I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. And I learned that sometimes the hardest battles aren't about holding on. They're about finding the strength to finally let go.